Hi, everyone. Brad Forster, founder and CEO of JBF Consulting. And I'm here with Bryan Stone, principal from our implementation delivery group. And we are talking today about business integration and specifically the top 5 lessons learned that we would love shippers to hear and adopt as their or ideally before they're going through their TMS implementation. I started JBF Consulting back in 2003. Prior to that, I spent many years in implementation as well as on the shipper side. And with 30 years of experience in transportation systems and project management and solution design, that's what I'm bringing to the table today. Bryan, you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Brett. So my name is Bryan Stone. I'm the principal of our delivery implementation services. I've spent about 25 years in the implementation services groups in various roles. I worked for a large application vendor for about 15 years, starting out as a functional consultant, working my way through a solution architect, doing project management work. So I've kind of played both roles on the vendor side, as well as being with JBF for over 5 years now, more on the business integration side. So I've seen it from both angles, from vendor as well as the business integration side. So glad here to be here today.
Good. So the top 5, which we're going to show up here in just a second, are really kind of our hit list, a culmination of 25 to 30 years of implementation experience. These are the things, the items that we think are critical that shippers really need to understand about implementation and also about TMS in general. It's not as simple as you think, and we see a lot of frequent mistakes that we'd like to expose here and hopefully educate some shippers, within a transportation function as they're looking to implement and be successful with an implementation, and ideally get a return on that implementation investment. Here are some of the top 5 things that shippers should look out for. Starting at the top, I'll kind of kick things off with orchestration. Orchestration is a term that is very contemporary. It gets a lot of publicity in terms of software orchestration. But really, we want to use this term for shippers and impart upon them that with a little bit of planning and communication and organization ahead of the implementation kickoff, can be a great, very low cost insurance policy to make sure before you get started making the big investments that you've really got your ducks in a row. Right. So some of the key things that I've seen over my 30-year career doing transportation systems is number one, defining the scope, the rollout plan, and aligning the RACI for all parties. And Bryan, I don't know about you, but I think most shippers tend to glaze over when they hear the term RACI, right? Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. But in my perspective, the RACI is the most critical aspect of a statement of work, whether it's between a software professional services organization or a consulting firm. You have any horror stories or pain points there from a RACI perspective that you've seen over the years?
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. I agree with you that it's one of the critical things, and it often gets missed, particularly in statements of work, right? And so it either falls to that beginning of a project where we're rushing to kick off the project, and it kind of gets skimped over, and then you end up paying for it later on when you're in design or your build and test, and it's not clear on, does the client own this? Does the business integrator own it? Does the software vendor own it? So I absolutely agree that that's something that is critical and is frequently missed. For example, in our build phase where it's unclear, we've gathered our requirements during our design, and now it's unclear on who, if anybody, is writing, for example, a functional specification for the technical team to start develop integration, right? Is that the client's doing that? In which case they're usually not equipped. That's not something that they're used to doing. And if it's the vendor, that's something, especially if it's not directly related to their application, might be something they're uncomfortable doing or didn't have the time allocated in their budget and timeline. So you end up getting to a point where you uh, have a discussion on who owns it and or doesn't. That takes time, and that automatically puts the project at risk rather than having it identified in the beginning. So I
Right.
think that the RACI certainly is a critical one.
the other thing, and not to go too deep here on RACI, because I know everybody loves talking about RACIs, is that they can be also very useful in exposing gaps or assumed gaps in terms of who's doing what. So I've seen a lot of shippers get really surprised, maybe even during testing time when they realize that, oh, the vendor is taking a train the trainer approach. Does that mean that we're just getting a template training material and then we have to customize it? Yeah, that's what it means, right? So there's a lot of really critical things kind of sometimes embedded into the RACI, or I've also seen some software vendors be, let's say, less than transparent, not put a RACI in. They don't even put in activities and deliverables into their statements of work. Clients sign those because they want to get started and they want to experience the benefits of the implementation, but they missed a whole lot of questions, and there's a whole lot of content in there that is extremely meaningful and can be very impactful and cost a whole lot of money to fix.
Yeah.
So even though it's not fun, I strongly recommend really going through the RACI before the implementation kicks off. The compounding factor here is that many implementations these days are multi-party implementations, right? You've got sometimes a business integrator, a system integrator, you've got the software vendor or vendors, right? Because it is very common to have multiple vendors being implemented at the same time. When you're lining up multiple parties, some of those external, some of them internal, procurement, IT, customer service, logistics, finance, etc., just figure out the plan, figure out who's doing what, lay out all the activities, lay out the roadmap before you kick off the project. This is totally feasible to do. If you need help, this is the kind of work that a business integrator like JBF can provide you. But it's really a cheap and easy way to make sure that all parties are in alignment and rowing in the same direction, and we have a good governance structure before the project kicks off and you start spending a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll close it up by saying, in the end, you're going to have to, or the project is going to have to address this at some point. So the question is when you do it, right? Do you want to be doing it on the fly during build, during test, during hypercare, and debating on who owns what, or I wasn't sure, does my team have the right skill sets? That's a very difficult and costly time to have that discussion. So it's the old an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think it's investment well spent to make sure everybody understands and knows what they're doing and has the skill set to do it early on in the project versus trying to do it on the fly, which would be much more time consuming and put your overall timeline at risk.
Yeah. Yeah, the second one, as we transition here, let's jump from the beginning of a project implementation before we kick off to the end, right? And the thing that we say to our clients is that go live is not the end of the journey; it's really the start. You've gone through the implementation process. Now you're live. This is not the time to take your foot off the gas pedal, so to speak. This is when you really need to invest in adoption to make sure that you're maintaining this system for the foreseeable future. Ideally, at least 10 years. We'd like to see clients sticking with their transportation platform before they have to, really modernize or change things up. So, Brian, when you see go live is not business readiness, what does that mean to you, and what do you have in terms of horror stories that you might be able to share?
Yeah. So what it means to me is a lot of clients, you get to the go live and there's this excitement of we've accomplished something, and they certainly have. The question is, did you achieve what you set out to? Did you improve the process materially? Did you address the pain points? Right. And so what that gets me thinking is kind of where JBF plays our role kind of in the business integrator space, right? Where what we're trying to do is look at a project holistically, right, from the beginning and saying, let's establish our KPIs. Let's establish the things that we're trying to solve. That way we can, when we get to the go live, we can easily measure and say, did we accomplish this? Did we not accomplish this? And to kind of go back to the comparison of a business integrator or a system integrator, oftentimes, and not always, A system integrator is more concerned about, is their application working, right? Is it stood up? And that's an important piece for sure. But I think what we're trying to do is look holistically, is not only is the application stood up, but are the users ready? Can they adopt the system? Is it better than it was before? Are we driving savings and value? Right. And I think that's where we play a role. So that's what I think about.
Yeah. I spent a few years doing pre-sales work, right, for a software company and for multiple software companies. And there's a common question that I get asked is, why do TMS implementations take so long? And they say, is it feature function complexity? Is it bloat of the software? It's really none of those things. The secret is, if you've done any time in pre-sales, it takes really little time to get a TMS to a working, operating model. We would do this for prospects in a day or two, right? We can have the TMS cranking out carrier selection, order consolidation, load tendering, paying freight bills in a weekend. The reality though is, when we integrate it into your systems, when we integrate the application into your workflow and your business process, and you have end users of different functions that are interacting with this software, the integration, the automation, the business enablement, the workflow is completely changed. These are the things that take time. It is not really the feature activation or the technical implementation of the actual TMS that takes the longest.
Yep.
Uh, I
Absolutely.
think that's a surprise for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think also companies underestimate the uniqueness and the nuances that each of their businesses have, right? I mean, we've been doing this for a long time across a lot of different sectors. And while there's obviously commonality, right? Every business, even if you're both in the retail sector, there's a uniqueness about your shipping needs, about your requirements, about your store requirements, your DCs, your vendors, right? And I think it is often missed that those things are unique and need to be built in to some extent to each application. And that takes a good bit of time, right? It's not always a perfect fit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good segue to item number 3. Does it run, or does it run the business, right? So a technical go live, an application level go live is relatively easy to do, right? Where the risk and the complications come is when you apply that to, production order volumes, when you actually start running your logistics operations using this new system, using the new process, using the new user procedures. These are when things start to break down. And I'm working with a client right now to assess a previously implemented supply chain system. And we're hearing user stories and feedback saying, well, it works for the normal stuff, but when I have to do things that we still do on a regular kind of like weekly basis, like RMA process for returning goods that don't pass quality or were, over short and damage, um, we can't go into the system and update quantities because it's locked out. We're prevented from doing this workflow. So I have to create a pro forma $0 purchase order so that I can trick the system into updating item level quantities in our inventory management system. The application is running as it was designed and configured and implemented, but it is not necessarily meeting the edge case or even the, hey, we do this once or twice a week type thing. Those things become very problematic. And over a long period of time, 5 to 10 years ideally, users start to rebel. The application loses its kind of traction and stickiness. Workarounds start to pop up with Excel spreadsheets or little, shadow IT type applications. And I think the thing that I see, and I'd love to get your input here, Bryan, is when design happens, we design usually starting with the happy path. And that leads to build and test that is also very focused on happy path, right? These are the normal primary order flows, primary operational challenges that we're trying to automate and solve for in the TMS. But what we're not considering is that, hey, we've got some of these edge cases that actually happen a few times a week. And, as we're dealing with enterprise at scale, right? Those little edge cases tend to be, accumulation of like, hey, we're spending 50 million, 100 million of freight in these edge cases. They're actually very relevant for us to design and configure and test. And I see them a lot of times. We're at least not testing for those edge cases. Do you see this commonly as I do?
I do, and I think where I draw the important distinction is really in our design phase. This is where, for me, as a former project manager and a solution architect, this is where it all kind of really begins, right? And a lot has to do with our requirements gathering. And it's not as simple as listing our requirements on a page, right? That's important. We need to get that out. But to me, the add-on that we do at JBF and business integrators do in general is what I call a requirements matrix, right? So that's not just what is the requirement, it's how is this requirement being solved? So in the example that you gave around these like edge cases or things that they do once or twice a week, those are requirements. We also need to answer, how are we solving these? Right? Is this a standard functionality within the TMS? Is this something that needs to be handled outside of the system? Is this something that can't be solved at all and is a gap? Right? Identifying that during our design phase starts to establish, what is our build going to look like? If all of a sudden we have 15, 20% of things that fall outside of the standard, the question is our design good enough at
Yeah,
that point, right? Like there's a
yeah,
threshold where just pushing everything and saying it'll be handled some other way, that then becomes the path, right? And that's not
yeah.
one that ends up being sustainable. So to me, that's where it starts, is that requirements traceability matrix. To kind of keep it flowing a little bit here, where that ends up is we end up with test scenarios that need to tie back to that requirements traceability matrix to say, we had this edge case requirement. Do we have a test scenario for that? Did we confirm in UAT or SIT um, that we can do that and the client is happy with however it works, both from a functional point of view as well as a process point of view? So that for me
Yeah.
is what I'm hearing there, and that's kind of the way we typically go about trying to address that or mitigate those concerns later on down the line.
We should put RACI and requirements traceability matrix up there on the. These are the words that shippers hear as consulting or software jargon, and they stop paying attention.
Right.
But these are really critical items and artifacts. Get beyond the naming conventions. But the requirements traceability matrix is essentially mapping back the design prior to the build and test to make sure that the business, the shipper, right? If you're the VP or the director of transportation at your company and you don't understand the requirements traceability matrix, then you're leaving a lot of guesswork and chance to the people who are designing and building and configuring your new application, your system. Once you get to test, if you don't understand that requirements traceability, it may be like, well, you did ask for a second bathroom upstairs in your house that we're building here, but we didn't really get to that. We thought it was an edge case. You got a half bath downstairs, and your house is move-in ready. And when you move in, you realize that there's no bathroom on the second floor. Well, that kind of sucks. The requirements traceability matrix is what tells you what you're going to get at the end of your implementation journey, but I hear and see so many shippers, especially on the functional side,
Yep.
tuning out because they think it's a technical term and they just close their ears because that sounds like an IT function, not a transportation function.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Brad. There, I've had more success describing what the document is and then following on with the name, right? Explaining that, hey, what we're trying to do
Yeah.
here is identify your requirements, how they're going to be achieved, and tie them into testing. And I think more people logically understand that makes some sense rather than, well, we need to build a requirements traceability matrix, and people feel it's a little bit of consulting jargon, doesn't
Yeah.
exactly win
Yeah.
anybody over. So I've had success starting with the definition and getting people in agreement that that's a logical thing to do, and then follow on with kind
Yeah.
of what we call it.
So a very good segue to number four, integration is an operating model functional problem, right? So when we talk about the requirements traceability matrix, right, our geek speak, the requirements traceability matrix essentially says, here's what I'm asking for, right? And here are all the problems to solve. These are the requirements. And the traceability matrix essentially gives us a model to say, how are those individual requirement problems being solved? Integration is a very common way to solve for those requirements. Hey, we need to get customer locations into our TMS. Okay, that requires an integration. So that integration becomes now part of the operating model that the business needs to design. And I also see business users, if you're a director of transportation and you're the kind of the functional project lead on your implementation, do not tune out during the integration conversations because integration is essentially business automation enablement. And in the experience that I have, the other thing that I see shippers doing, the transportation functional side, is not only do they disregard the integration work and the discovery, but they don't pay attention to the actual logic that is built into these integrations. And nearly every client, every shipper that we talk with is really going for, we need agility. We need to be agile. When business changes, we need to be able to quickly respond. And we want our system, we're implementing this new system so that we can become more agile. But then during the design phase, the business constituents start paying less attention because it's an integration topic. And integration is, hey, which orders are relevant for us to take from the ERP system? How are they different from one channel to the other? Uh, how many different order types are there? What is the order date logic that goes within those orders? All of those things become filter criteria for the integration. They become business logic. How do we segregate these orders that go through a different downstream workflow than these other set of orders? How do we map our policies, for example, customer service pickup cutoff times? Next day shipment, is a 3 p.m. cutoff or a 2 p.m. cutoff for a next day shipment or what have you. Those policy type things get hard coded in many cases into the integration logic. And the logic is where we see a lot of issues pop up when end users experience a TMS and they say the TMS isn't working. It's not solving for these orders. It's leaving them unscheduled. Why? And the number one culprit, Brian, is usually what?
Yep, it's the integration and the lack of the business being engaged, right? There's this view of a line of demarcation. I don't want to be a developer, right? And that's not what we're asking folks to do. It's really to partner with your IT team or whoever's doing the middleware development and work as a team together to ensure that your requirements are not only built into the integration, but built in a way that allows that flexibility, that agility that you talked about, Brad, right?
Yeah.
It can't be that if in 6 months your date logic window needs to change, you need to now crack open, an entire middleware application and find a developer that's likely already busy onto some other work, right? It can't be something that difficult to do. So it's particularly important for the business to identify what are the areas that we really need that flexibility on. Is there a way to build an integration such that the business
Yes.
can be self-service to some extent, right? If they need to
Yes.
change a date window from 48 hours to 72 hours, that shouldn't require
Right.
an IT involvement, right? That should be
That's right.
something that they can
Yeah.
self-serve. And from a technical point of view, that's not hard.
Right.
It just needs to be known in the beginning, and a competent IT team can support that, right? But
Yeah.
if that was never communicated, IT never got that requirement, they're gonna do it in the simplest, fastest way, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that
Yeah.
becomes the problem.
I love that. I love that idea. I really encourage clients all the time as we're going through design to, design in avoiding IT, right? We want business users to have control of business policy changes, business rule changes, things like, hey, we need to update our next day shipment policy from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. because our carriers are changing their pickup cutoff schedule. How do we do that? Oh, we got to call IT. I'm not sure which integration has all of those things in it, and there's probably more than one, right? And so they call IT. They're in the queue. 6 months later, maybe something gets funded, and maybe they get an enhancement, and maybe they don't. Instead, let's design a separate little application module, very easy to do, that allows the business users to update these pieces of master data where integrations can look into this table instead of hard coding everything top and bottom from the policy all the way down to the procedure.
Yeah.
I love that idea. I wish more had that kind of flexibility and design, but many don't. Many just do a straight data mapping and take what the vendor gives them, and this is where we see a lot of fragility instead of agility.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to what we talked about a little bit before is that it may take us a little bit more time on the front end to build that flexibility and to build that application, as you said, or some type of parameter file or things like that. But in the end, it's going to save the business quite a bit of time. And frankly, I think the IT team would probably appreciate that upfront work, right? Rather than the onesie, twosie, I need to change this little thing, right? That gets difficult to support when they've got likely many other priorities across the organization to pick up something that's going to take them, a few hours or something along those lines. But
Yeah,
it may take 6 months to get into their queue, as you said. So
yeah.
again, it's worth paying for that upfront to save in the long run.
Just a quick trip down memory lane here, Brian. About 15 years ago, you and I worked together on a project with a client in the automotive space, and we were floored with this integration from orders passing down. And every time an order would come in, it would create a new location in the TMS. And as we kind of were asked to kind of investigate, troubleshoot, we went all the way up to customer service procedures for specific types of orders in their ERP system, where instead of selecting from a drop down, here's the customer number, here's the customer ship to address, they were manually keying in at a note within the order in the ERP system, here is the ship to information. So every time we get a new order transaction, it wouldn't find the ship to information. So it would create a new
I
one,
know.
right? Create another one. And this is where the integration logic that is designed and implemented needs to be understood by the business, maybe sometimes all the way upstream in terms of like the procedures in which our customer service or our purchasing department are creating orders differently for different categories or segments of these transactions that flow downstream into a TMS. These are the reasons that we really encourage business users and the business leadership during an implementation to really pay attention to the integration design.
Yeah. And to take that comment another direction a little bit, one of the things that I think is critical there is really OCM, organizational change management, right? And it starts at the beginning of identifying all those stakeholders, right? If we're doing a TMS implementation, it's not just your TMS planners and your freight clerks and some DC warehouse folks, right? It's all the other systems that you're working with. And like you said there in that example, those order entry folks, the ERP folks are part of the process, right? That they feed the downstream system. So their choices have an impact. So as part of our organizational change management, we should be identifying their stakeholders, making sure they're brought up to speed as to what might be changing, what might we request that they do differently, because it's unlikely that they know that they're, in that
Yeah,
example that we work together with, they don't necessarily know that by them typing in or fat fingering or spelling street wrong or spelling, abbreviating it, putting a period at it, that they just
yeah,
created three different locations in the
yeah,
TMS, right? They don't necessarily know that. And I think that's the organizational change management can help bring all that together to make sure we've identified the stakeholders and we're communicating out with all of them. So
yeah. That's good. It's a good segue to the last point here. Successful implementations need measurements. Not all of these measurements are straightforward. I can't count the number of implementations that I've been through where at the end of it, we don't really know if we've had a return on investment or not because we ask those questions. We think the kind of the system is saving. But am I wrong, Brian? Do you see the same thing like in your history? Does anybody really take the time up front to define how they're going to measure at the end? And in some cases, like we have clients that expect to measure things at the end, but they have no basis of comparison,
Right.
right? Because they're not measuring these things today, or they're measuring them in a different way. So when we get to the end, we're comparing apples to oranges or bananas, right? So
Yeah.
a little work to kind of normalize this stuff from a measurement standpoint before the implementation even begins can be a really great directional indicator that the decisions that we make during the implementation, the design things that we always have to cut, are not violating or taking us too far off the course for the things that matter. And we don't know if those things are going to work or not unless we measure them. Right.
Yep.
So this is another big gap that we see with clients all the time,
Yep.
measurements.
I agree with you. In all my years, I can count on one hand or only probably a few fingers of clients that really put the effort in upfront, had clear KPIs on what they expected, a baseline of what their current system was doing that we could compare. It's a
Yeah.
fraction of a fraction of the clients that I've worked with throughout my years. And I think part of that is because we kick off a project and there's obviously pressure on every go live date. I've yet to be on a project where it's just like, oh, there's no go live date, right? It's just easy sailing, right? There's automatically a date out there that is fixed. And folks look at some of these tasks as perhaps not as value added as others, right? So
Right.
we want to jump into design. We want to get to requirements. We want to get the build, get the test, right? And we skip out on some of those other meaningful steps like the KPIs, like establishing the baseline, because
Yep.
they're not seen as value added in the immediate term, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
then we get to the end and it's too late to go back and assess what we should have been measuring, right? It's a little
Right.
late for that. So
Yeah.
that is
And
definitely
the thing that resonates with me and kind of the hook to change management is that it's amazing how much greater adoption can become at the end user level when the users understand from a data and a KPI perspective why I'm taking these actions, why we're doing these new procedures and workflows, why am I using this new tool? If they have a basis of understanding the metrics that matter, whether you call them objectives and key results, OKRs, or you call them KPIs, or they're just part of your organizational or your functional targets, right? These are goals for hitting certain numbers within a logistics function. Users that are able to map back to see improvements in those metrics understand that these behaviors that I'm doing lead to an improvement of the KPIs of quality or efficiency or savings that my leadership has told me is good. This it creates this reinforcing flywheel for users and users, load planners, freight pay clerks, et cetera. Anybody that is using the TMS, but we can't do that unless we have measurements to help them, encourage them, and tell them why these things that they're doing are impactful.
yep. And I think it also creates a bit of a North Star for a steering committee, right? Or the project leadership, right? As we
Yeah,
get into our design phase, there's going to be choices we're going to make. Is this in scope? What is the priority of this task or this feature request, right? And if we understand what our KPIs are and what we're trying to achieve, we can assess, does this harm that? Does it improve that? Right. And it gives us something to measure against and help make a solid, informed decision on. If we don't have those things identified early on, we're making decisions somewhat blindly without the knowledge of, well, shoot, I just made a decision that has a negative consequence to a KPI that I'm going to measure at the end. Did I mean to do that? Did I not mean to do that? So I think having those identified early can really help a steerco assess and prioritize things that are naturally going to come up in any project where you've got to make a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, these decisions can be hard, but they're critical. We're helping a client right now, Brian. I know you understand this analogy that I'm going to tee up here, with a very difficult design decision. And this design decision is essentially: should we leave our, kind of our outbound operations static, or should we make them a little bit more dynamic? And this decision is really essential for them in terms of whether they're going to get any type of return on investment from outbound optimization and consolidation savings or not. Right. So while technically it may be very challenging to explain to the business that this decision feels technical, but it's really operational. This defines the design of the operating model automation within the system that you're implementing, and deciding one way or the other, even though the automation and kind of moving outbound to more of a dynamic model and less of a static fixed schedule for this, kind of brick and mortar environment, means the wrong decision would completely neuter the return on investment that I would get out of that. And this doesn't have anything to do with necessarily change management, but until we make the decision, right? So if we make the decision to go dynamic on the outbound side, we can hit that KPI for our expected return on investment. And now the users have at least a basis from that decision to say, oh, I understand why this decision was made to automate. Even though it changes my day-to-day workflow, I see how, because we're measuring the savings from the TMS investment, I can now map my behaviors and understand why the decision was made, so that I'm now more compliant, maybe, or amenable to maybe doing a little different day in the life workflow procedure as a load planner. Instead of it being kind of fixed static and easy, I'm going to put a little bit more effort into it because I understand why the decision was made to save money. And I have a metric that shows me that my behavior is saving the company money. That feels good. And this is where we get better buy in and adoption at the end user level.
Yep. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. This client is certainly struggling with making that decision, and I think some of the things we talked about earlier around the orchestration and the organizing your project plan and really understanding what are your requirements early on. I think all of those things kind of tie into that specific example of,
Yeah.
had we done some things done had that client done some things differently, we might be in a different place than they are now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So just to kind of put a bow on this stuff, Brian, it was good kind of commiserating, right? You and I share a lot of the same background and experiences here. We do see trends. Many shippers view these implementations as IT initiatives, right? And I think that by and large is the parent level, highest level barometer of success. The enterprise clients that we work with that are the most successful are the business users that have the most time and attention and focus on the outcome and focus through the implementation process. It is business led, IT enabled. It should not be the inverse. The IT led business is kind of like, just riding the coattails of an IT deployment, can never expect, to get the outcomes that they're after. It's going to run, but it may not run the business. They're going to go live, but is it really running the business? Am I ready to do this? All of these things start to break down if the business does not drive the bus.
Yep.
So if we had to leave off with anything, I think that would be my parting message.
Yep, I agree with that. Also, the belief that any TMS implementation is kind of a lift and shift, which kind of goes to that whole IT mentality, right? That we're just going to move from
Yeah,
where we are today to something else, whether that's an upgrade to a new system, right? The idea that we're just lift and shifted, right? It's going to be IT move, and that
yeah,
that that is just a very, very rare scenario that is actually true, and really a red flag to the points that you made, that seems like the client is really believing this is going to be an IT led um, IT driven solution, and those are more likely to be unsuccessful in the long run.
Yeah, great. So if you're a shipper, you're an enterprise, or you're a business or IT, if you're experiencing any of these types of challenges, this is the work that we do. We can help orchestrate, we can help plan, define, design. We can improve the outcomes, and that's what we're here to help with. So, if there are questions, if there's feedback, or even other fun horror stories that people would like to contribute, drop a comment, and we will be talking about this, I'm sure, Bryan, again in the future.
Great. Great talk with you, Brad. Appreciate the time.
Yep. Thank you, Bryan.